Welcome to Everyday Lessons in the Bible. Today we begin the book of Daniel. Now, Daniel speaks to all of those who face conflicting and complex moral decisions. And the book was in the time of 605 BC, which is when Israel was taken into captivity by the Babylonians. And it shows faithfulness in a hostile culture and God's sovereignty over all kings and empires and the preservation of God's people. It also has apocalyptic keys throughout, just vivid imagery to help us to understand or try to glean from what's currently happening and what's happening in the future. The people of Israel spoke Hebrew, but the Babylonians spoke Aramaic. And so they eventually had to learn Aramaic. And so some of the book of Daniel is written in Aramaic, or probably a lot of it is. And then the beginnings of it is in Hebrew because they were having to learn the language. They weren't allowed to speak Hebrew, at least not out in public. They probably could at home without anybody being around, but they weren't allowed to speak that for everybody else to hear. So we're going to talk about Daniel chapter 1 today because there's a lot to unpack. So the Babylonians worshipped the god Nebo, which is to protect the king or the crown. And at the very beginning, the king of Judah was taken into captivity, and King Nebuchadnezzar had the chief take all the youth that was without blemish, no physical deformities, and no moral defilement. And he had them all come into the king's palace because he wanted to teach them literature and the language, and raise them up to be part of their culture, and just to kind of train them over into their way of being. And I think he probably thought, they're young, they're impressionable, we can change them, we can mold them, they're still young enough. However, Daniel and his three friends were not having any of that. So they brought him into the palace and they wanted them to eat the king's food, which would defile them. And Daniel had resolved in his heart that he was not going to do that. He was not going to be defiled. And God had favor on them. God had compassion. And he, it says that God gave Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the chief of the eunuchs. And so Daniel went to them and said, this goes against our beliefs. We are not going to defile ourselves. He said, test us. Let us eat vegetables and water for 10 days and see what we look like compared to all the rest. Because the chief eunuch was concerned, you're going to look weak and puny, and we're supposed to build you up and make you look strong and mighty. And so Daniel was like, test us. And so God's favor on them allowed that to happen. And so after the 10 days, they looked better than all the rest, which of course they would, because they have God, they have what God has told them, and they have the favor of God on their lives. And so Daniel never bows to culture or moral pressure, which is something that we should learn from. And they also had changed their names. And so Daniel, they had changed his name to Belshazzar. And Daniel means God is my judge. And his name was changed to mean guard his life. So it went from focusing on God to self. And then Hananiah was, God has been gracious to me. And Hananiah's name was changed to Shadrach, which means I am very fearful of God. And then you've got Mishael, which was who is like God, or his mother asked God for him. And that was changed to Meshach, which is I am of little account. So it's just so demeaning what they changed their names to. And names back then had meaning. You know, I don't know how much we focus on that today, but they do. I know I looked up my name, and it is what was interesting is it means a lily, the flower of the lily. And it's funny because when I look up the flower that it's referring to, it's like my favorite flower. And I just thought that was really, really cool. I mean, it had other meanings too that I thought were very impactful, but that always resonated with me, that the flower that I've always loved is the flower of my name. I thought that was cool. Anyway, so then you've got Azariah, which is God has helped me, and they changed his name to Abednego, which is servant of the shining one, or Nebu. So I just thought that was kind of interesting that, you know, changing their names has such significance back then. But I think about how that happens to us today. You know, we can get our identity stolen. People can do stuff to us, or we can allow people to do stuff to us, and it changes our identity. It may not change your name literally, but it does change who you think of yourself or who you think you are. I know going through the trials that I've been to really destroyed who I was, to the point where I didn't know who I was anymore. Like I didn't have hobbies or likes or anything. It was like going through all the trials, it just changed everything about me. And I know I've spent the last 9+ years trying to figure out, okay, who am I? What do I like? What do I want to do? What interests me? Because all of that was so surrounded by another person that I lost every ounce of me. I had to rediscover who I am in Christ and who God has called me to be, and the things that I like and the things that I want to do. And I don't know, it's just crazy at how that can happen. And culture can do that to you. Culture can take away things in your life and just destroy you. And Daniel stood his ground, and he did not compromise his morals and values. He didn't eat the food or drink the wine that they presented to him. And I just think that's very powerful. I think that we as Christians, you have to know. See, Daniel had this already resolved in his heart before he was faced with this. And that's what I think is so important for us, is you need to decide now what you believe, what mountain you're going to stand on, what mountain you're willing to die on for the beliefs that you have, and stand and be unwavering. Because when things come your way, you need to already know that. You cannot be trying to decide, okay, what's right, what's wrong. You need to already know that today before you face any kind of trial or be faced with any moral decision in your life. You need to already know that so that you can stand strong. And knowledge and revelation needs to come from God. He is our source of insight or source of truth. He is all truth, and everything is God's truth. It's not your truth, not somebody else's truth, not the world's truth. It's God's truth. And you need to know that and stand on that. And God gave visions to Daniel and understanding. And you're going to see that throughout all of these chapters. And God speaks to believers and unbelievers. So I just think that's very, very important in these times that we're facing. And God will give you the increase. And just like here with Daniel, they looked 10 times better than everybody else by following what God had told them to do versus what the world, the culture was trying to tell them to do. And so I think that's very applicable to us today, is if you will follow God and stand on the morals and the values that God has given us, the truth that God has given us through His Word, you will come out 10 times better than those who follow the world and the culture of this world. Thank you for listening to Everyday Lessons in the Bible. I hope you have a blessed day. Please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel.